Tonight, we begin with a development that U.S. officials, NATO analysts, and military insiders had feared, tracked, and, in some cases, quietly prepared for, a strike that unfolded not over weeks or months, but in a matter of hours. Hours that changed the balance in the Black Sea. Hours that exposed a vulnerability the Kremlin hoped to keep hidden. Hours that sent shockwaves through military command centers from Moscow to Washington. What Ukraine did today crossed a line that Russian naval command had hoped would hold. Now, when that line broke, Ukraine's defenders did not hesitate. They responded with precision, audacity, and a level of technological sophistication that few expected. For months now, there had been signals, not official statements, not formal warnings, just signals that Ukraine was preparing something different, something bold. Ukraine has been resilient, yes, but they have been innovative in their resilience. Their moves have followed a certain rhythm, a pattern, almost a dance. But what set off alarm bells in Sevastopol this week was that the pattern went silent. Military analysts who monitor Black Sea activity know the indicators. The sudden drop in radio chatter, the movement of supply vessels at odd hours, the shifting of air defense batteries, the sudden blackout of satellite imagery over key naval bases, all of that went quiet. And whenever Ukraine goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. For weeks, Russian naval officers had noticed the absence of Ukrainian drone activity along the usual corridors. Patrols reported fewer sightings. The air was still, almost too still. It was the kind of calm that, in military history, often precedes a storm. And in the war rooms of Moscow, the silence was unnerving. The Black Sea Fleet, once the pride of Russia's naval power, had grown accustomed to a certain routine: patrol, defend, and occasionally strike. But now the routine was broken. Ukrainian intelligence, working with Western partners, had been mapping Russian naval movements, identifying weak points, and waiting for the perfect moment. That moment, as it turned out, was closer than anyone in the Kremlin realized. Early this morning, NATO surveillance assets detected what they described as a swarm launch, a coordinated deployment of unmanned surface and aerial drones, including several new models that had not been seen in action in over a year. These are the kinds of assets that Ukraine only deploys when they are signaling something very specific. A warning to Russia, a test of new technology, or a direct challenge to naval supremacy. Observers didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Ukraine was changing its posture. And when a nation at war shifts its strategy without explanation, even by a small measure, the world pays attention. The drones, some no larger than a jet ski, others resembling miniature stealth aircraft, moved with uncanny coordination. They slipped past Russian radar, hugging the coastline, using the cover of darkness and electronic jamming to mask their approach. By the time Russian sailors spotted the first wave, it was too late. The attack was not just a show of force. It was a demonstration of capability, a message to Moscow that the Black Sea was no longer a safe harbor. The warning issued by NATO tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic, it was urgent. Briefing after emergency briefing described Ukraine's move as unprecedented, highly coordinated, and perhaps most importantly, a game changer for naval warfare in the region, but surprise only works if the target hesitates. Russia did not. In fact, their response today was among the most aggressive we've seen in this conflict. Here's what we know. Within minutes of the first drone breach, Russian warships opened fire with everything from heavy machine guns to anti-aircraft missiles. These weren't the usual warning shots. These were full-scale defensive barrages, systems that the Black Sea Fleet only deploys when they are preparing to repel a major assault. But the drones kept coming. Some were destroyed. Others slipped through, weaving between ships, targeting radar arrays, communications towers, and most critically, the flagship of the fleet. Tonight, Ukrainian military sources confirmed that their forces launched a multi-pronged drone attack on Russian naval targets, including the Admiral Makarov, a frigate that had recently been repositioned for what analysts believe was a planned missile strike on Ukrainian coastal cities. Ukrainian operators struck before the Russians could reposition their air defenses. They hit the Admiral Makarov. They hit a key supply vessel. They hit a floating dry dock that was likely preparing to support repairs for damaged ships. In other words, Ukraine targeted the logistical heart of the Black Sea Fleet, the command and control components that would have made a new Russian offensive operational. This is what made NATO warning so urgent. Ukraine's move wasn't just symbolic, it was actionable. It represented the kind of move that could shift the balance of power in the Black Sea if left unchecked. And Ukraine, understanding that, fully responded with force, not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't waste drones on decoys. They didn't target civilian infrastructure. They hit the right ships. They hit the right docks. And in doing so, they exposed a critical weakness in Russia's naval defenses, an over-reliance on static positions and outdated electronic warfare systems. And here's where the story becomes even more intense. Western intelligence sources now believe that Ukraine's latest move was designed to test the resilience of Russian naval command after months of reported morale issues and equipment shortages. Ukraine wanted to see whether Russia would falter under pressure, but instead, the opposite happened. Russia didn't retreat. They counterattacked with a barrage of missiles and anti-drone systems that lit up the night sky over Sevastopol. But Ukraine's drones were so agile, so unpredictable, that even Russian commanders were caught off guard. You don't get the Kremlin's attention easily. But today, Ukraine did. Military analysts speaking with Western media under anonymity described Russia's shift as a defensive panic, a way to buy time and regroup. But Ukraine proved today that they remain both innovative and relentless. Their tactics were not only bold, they were so precisely executed that several Russian ships were forced to retreat to secondary ports. That matters because it shows two things. First, Ukraine is not a passive defender. They are an active disruptor. Second, Russia's naval doctrine, built on the assumption of uncontested control in the Black Sea, is now in question. As reports continued coming in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of Ukraine's response. Special operations, teams carried out sabotage missions on shore, forcing Russian supply lines to reroute. Drone operators targeted radar installations that had been upgraded in the last month. Electronic warfare units operating from hidden positions reportedly jammed Russian communications used by the fleet to coordinate defenses. This wasn't just a drone attack. This wasn't just a naval skirmish. This was a coordinated multi-domain operation. This was a statement of intent. And intent is the one thing Russia has struggled to maintain since the sinking of the Moskva. For every advance they have made, Ukraine has countered with something that complicates Russian planning and exposes new vulnerabilities. Remember, Russia thought their Black Sea Fleet was untouchable. They thought their naval bases were secure. They thought their electronic warfare systems could neutralize any threat. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Their ships are vulnerable, their bases are exposed. Their technology is being outpaced by Ukrainian innovation. This is not the war Russia planned for, and it's certainly not the war they wanted. What makes this moment so critical and so dangerous is that Russia's latest move happened at a time when Vladimir Putin is under unprecedented pressure. Hardliners want escalation. Moderates want negotiation. Oligarchs want stability. The military wants results. Putin is balancing these demands while facing growing dissent at home and mounting losses abroad. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. And that vulnerability is now on full display for the world to see. NATO official statement now circulating through diplomatic channels was designed to signal that the alliance is not willing to let Russia rewrite the rules of naval warfare. Officials said plainly that Russia's response was inconsistent with international norms of engagement. That is diplomatic language for, you crossed a line and we're watching. You don't usually hear that tone from NATO unless something serious is at stake. And tonight, something very serious is at stake. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Zelensky addressed the nation in a calm, resolute speech tonight. He said, "We will not allow our seas to become a playground for aggression." He said, every ship that threatens our people will face consequences. And he said, Ukraine stands ready to defend every inch of our territory on land, in the air, and at sea. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a leader who understands just how high the stakes have become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Russia's latest move wasn't isolated. Along with the naval response, Russian Air Force units also increased sorties over the Black Sea. Cyber units launched new attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure, artillery batteries, increased shelling of coastal defenses. All of this happened within the same 24-hour period. When Russia moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. And tonight, Ukrainian intelligence is on high alert. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Russia is preparing a new amphibious assault. Another is that Russia is attempting to draw Ukrainian forces away from other critical fronts. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Russia is attempting to provoke a wider conflict in the Black Sea, drawing in NATO and other regional powers. But today, Ukraine took that card off the table. They didn't retreat. They didn't hesitate. They didn't wait for permission. They struck back hard. What we're watching now is a test of resolve. Russia wants to see if Ukraine will back down. Ukraine wants to show that they will not. NATO wants to prevent a wider war, and the world wants to prevent a humanitarian disaster. This is a test of nerves, technology, and political will. And tonight, the test is far from over. Tonight, we've heard from Western intelligence sources who are now monitoring Russian naval movements in real time. They say several ships have been moved to secondary ports. They say Russian commanders are reviewing their defensive protocol. And they say Russia's decision to escalate in the Black Sea is likely part of a broader strategy intended to regain the initiative after months of setbacks. But Ukraine is not intimidated. In fact, Ukraine is emboldened. Their response today, swift, precise, and relentless, sent a message to Russia that the Black Sea is contested territory, and it sent a message to NATO that Ukraine is ready to fight for every inch of it. As the night goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Russia hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that Ukraine's response was timely. It exposed Russian weaknesses. It disrupted Russian plans. And it gave Ukraine a much-needed boost in morale and international support. What happens next will depend on what Russia does in the next 48 hours. If they escalate, this moment will be remembered as the start of a new phase in the war. If they pull back, Ukraine and its allies have already shown they are ready. They have shown they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in months, Russia appears to be on the defensive. The Black Sea is quiet. Too quiet. And when Russia is quiet, it means they are thinking. It means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, Russia learned something they have learned many times before. Ukraine is unpredictable. Ukraine is resilient. And Ukraine is not backing down. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The balance of power in the Black Sea has shifted. The world is watching, and Ukraine has sent a message that will not be forgotten. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.